Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Our guest today, Lata Hamilton, is an inspiring change leadership and confidence coach. Typically, when we think of change leadership, our minds go right away to the ongoing changes in business culture. Lata is well known for her work with business leaders, but as we chatted, I realized that changes in business can only occur when individual people in the company change as well. Change, therefore, is as much personal as it is corporate. As a millennial, Lata embraces personal change from a much grander perspective than even I have. And I have been known for decades as a very vocal advocate of personal and life change. And just wait for some of Lata's ideas concerning change in her personal life. One subject that she is interested in, I am also interested in, and that is discussing with her the role of self-confidence. Confidence may be the most critical component for making significant changes in our life. Lata guides her students on the actions and attitudes needed to gain the confidence necessary for life and career changes. I just can't wait for our chat on these very important subjects. And so with that, let's bring on our very special guest today, coming to us from Sydney, Australia, Lata Hamilton. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It's absolutely fantastic to be here.
You know, I have to say this every time. You know, I've had more and more Australian people on the show, and Australian women especially. It is just the most lovely accent in the world. I just want to listen to you talk. You know,
thank you so much. That's so nice.
It's so beautiful. And then every now and then I'm going to have to say because it was a translation in accent that I didn't catch. But you know, I want you to know how fascinated I've become with you and your key idea that corporate change cannot be successfully implemented without individual change. But to begin with, and to provide a context, I thought perhaps we might spend just a moment for you to remind our listeners about the magnitude of changes occurring today in the world of work. What might you say, and I know this is a very difficult question to answer because it would be for me, but what are a few of the most common corporate change issues that you are seeing in the workplace today?
Yeah, it's probably a great question at this point in time as well, Charlie. Obviously, something that has happened, the globe over has been COVID, which was like a really big change that obviously was forced upon us. That wasn't something that was planned. It wasn't something that anybody could really be prepared for. And so we've kind of come out the other end of that, where now suddenly change management, understanding change, leading change is a top priority for like a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders, because they don't want to be caught short again. They're like, actually, we didn't realize that this was such a critical capability to build and a skill set to have. And, now they're seeing the opportunities as we kind of come out the other side of COVID and start to stabilize, seeing the opportunities of where their business can go, where their teams can go, and how they can set themselves up for success in the future. So for me, like if you want to kind of define change management really simply, it's moving people from doing things in one way to doing things in a new way. And we often do that through communications, training, and business readiness. It can be any kind of change in an organization, so it might be a new or changed process, product, service, team structure, operating model. It might be layoffs and downsizing. It might be digital transformation, new systems, applications, processes, and platforms. So anything that's happening in an organization, we can support with change management. And I think where our world is kind of going, there's probably three key areas that I'm seeing a lot of change start to spring up in our businesses. The first would be around sort of like that digital transformation space. Through COVID, everybody suddenly jumped and went sort of virtual, and they kind of needed those tools and those technologies to really help them do that. But that's also opened up the opportunity for automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, like anything now there's more appetite, I would say, for it as a way to set businesses up. Then the second area I really think is probably just like downsizing and really making sure that organizations are structured correctly. I'm seeing a lot of that happening. And then the third change I would say is probably a lot of changes to the way that we work, to the future of work, to the way that I'm not just talking about flexible work in terms of like working from home or working in the office, but I'm also talking about like, do you work 9 to 5 because that's what everybody does and that's what it is traditionally, or do you have more flexible work and potentially even flexible roles? So actually maybe not even going into a role that's clearly defined, because, in the future, like there's going to be all this work that we haven't even dreamed up yet. We don't even know that it exists. So it's having that openness, as you mentioned, Charlie, it's having that flexibility to be able to go like, I'm happy to use my skills, use my transferable skills to jump in anywhere. And I think they're going to be the really big shifts that we see across the world in business and in change.
What occurs to me as you say this, talking about the digital transformation space, the downsizing, and the way we work, the last one seems to me almost more significant than the others. The others are sort of transactional. We must do it in order to succeed as a business. But both of those are dependent upon the change in the way we work and the way we think about work. It's a whole different structure, as opposed to the old industrial, the boss says, here are the 8 things you do in the manufacturing line or customer service line. There's just a whole different framework, a whole different mindset that I think people like yourself as a millennial, and you're sort of right in the middle of millennials, is that right?
Yeah, I'm kind of smack bang in the middle of millennials, maybe like the Gen Zs are probably coming up pretty close behind me.
The Gen Z, see the Gen Zs. I'm calling them the Gen Z, so I like Gen Z. See, that's very Australian. It gives you, as I'm discovering just socially, not work-wise, and I'm calling them the later millennials and the earlier Gen Zers, there is a common personal lifestyle framework that is so different than what it was pre-COVID, what it was when I was a kid, and obviously in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But we develop habits, we develop belief systems, moral values, that we and put moral in question marks, ethical moral values that are changing because of our culture, and they change not only our personal behavior, but they change the way we work, do they not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's probably never been a better time to, like I like to say, like carve your own path for change in career, leadership and life. And I think about my generation of millennials, like a lot of us got told by our baby boomer parents, because we're the kids of baby boomers, we got told you can do anything you want, you can be anything that you want, the world is your oyster, like go out there, get it, we kind of got promoted or encouraged to sort of do higher education, to go to college, to go to university, and get those degrees under our belts, but in a way that it was almost like, get that so that you can have endless possibilities and endless pathways in front of you. So that's kind of the culture, from a family perspective that I grew up in, and I know a lot of like my friends and people that I know as well grew up with this kind of this positivity around where our lives could go and the choices that we could make and that personal power that we have. And so we kind of take that into our workplace, we take that into our careers, but sometimes then it means that we're actually working with generations who haven't necessarily got that same mindset or see those same possibilities of pathways. And it could be to travel. For a lot of us, it is about travel. I've definitely taken off a few months here and there, at a time to just take off and go travel. I've got friends who have taken sabbaticals to go, hike across South America and like really take those chunks of time. As you mentioned, it's kind of also around sort of a lot of my generation, millennials, started having their babies and their kids sort of through the COVID era, so they're having time at home, and so with their families, and they want to be able to continue that, and then just also probably seeing some of the outcomes of some of the older generations, some of the health challenges, relationship breakdowns, and things from overworking, from burnout, the stress and the mental fatigue from those things, and going like, that's not the life that we want to lead. Like, I look at some of the leaders that I've had in the past, and I look at them and I thank them, because I sort of see myself as being like you're role modeling to me what I don't want, and so that gives me the opportunity to choose what I do want.
You know, it makes me wonder about the boomer parents, because I'm an early boomer, born in '49. So it makes me think about the boomers who raised their children with open possibilities. You can be anything you want, which I was basically raised with that same value system. My mom, I'm adopted. My mom said, you know, the life is your oyster. You know, you just go out and do what you want. But I don't think, maybe with me, my parents, you know, were what is it called? The pre-boomers, the established something, I can't remember.
The greatest generation.
Were there generations before the baby boomers? I don't know.
Yeah, there was one and it was the builders. It was called the builders. And my generation was very close to the values of the builders. The millennials generation really is departing from the values of the boomers. And so when the boomers say you can be anything you want to be, they love that statement until they find out what you want to be, and they're not really tickled with what you want to be, because it doesn't fit into the value system that they have adopted and been raised with.
You're so right, Charlie, and like exactly that happened to me. So I was really looking for variety and challenge. You know, my model for sort of career and work had been my father. He was the main breadwinner. He worked in the same company for 25 years in the same corporate organization. And I watched him sort of just, you know, climb that corporate ladder and get pay rise and, become more senior and then retire from there. So for me, like, that was sort of the model of how you were successful in your career and in your life. But then as soon as I got into the workforce and I was like, I don't want to wait. I actually, I've been trained to be a leader already because I did a graduate program. I'm like, I want to start leading. I want to start making an impact. I want variety. I want challenge. So I actually jumped out of that kind of very traditional sort of climb the corporate ladder to move into the project and change space where I could, work really differently as a day rate contractor and not necessarily be a salaried, like, that perception of stability of a salaried role. My family thought I was crazy. So exactly what you mentioned, it's like, yep, the world is your oyster, you can do anything you like. But then when it came to some of those really traditional values around, you need to have a stable job, you need to work 9 to 5, you need to work Monday to Friday, they're like, how is it that you're, in something that is perceived to be, more contingent work, where you are being paid on a day rate and you've got shorter term contracts that might be like 6 to 12 months only. Like, I was earning really a lot of money really early on in my career. I tripled my salary in the space of 3 years to earning almost $200,000. But still for them, it was like, but it's not stable. And it's taken years for them to come to the point where they're like, wow, that actually worked for you. Like, you were happy to take a little bit of that perceived risk in order for the returns and the rewards, and to slowly kind of pace that. So it's been really interesting, probably lesson for them to be able to see that they don't, some of the advice that they've given us. I've got four siblings, and some of the advice that they've given us, was probably still based in a very traditional way of working and living.
I just want to kind of clue our listeners in. And we're taking the end of our conversation and putting it at the beginning, and I think it's even better. I want to end up talking about how these personal values impact the corporate values. But I really think, since we're on this path, I want to go on some of your individual values that run contrary to boomer values, or I don't know if contrary, they're just not in alignment exactly with boomer values, and they are so millennial values. I just spent a week with 12 people between 25 and 35. One was 40, and their views are very different, and I love it. I love change. I love different thinking, and they are contrary to much of what I was raised to believe. So I think if we explore the individual a bit, we can then link it in, tie it in with how that impacts the organization. Now, I know one of your big commitments is that you are very committed to women. It's not that you don't care about men's advancement, men's confidence and building and working better in the society, but you feel women perhaps have a different hurdle or a different set of preferences. And talk to me about change today as you see it from your millennial perspective. Change today, how that impacts women maybe differently than men. Can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's just really been around sort of seeing I actually did gender studies when I was at college, at university, and just seeing some of the research out there around, like women often are making up equal representation in tertiary education, in higher education, and then they enter the workforce in the same levels, and then you sort of start to see them still, even today, sort of start to drop off in terms of the gender pay gap, which is still prevalent across most of the world, where to do the same job, men are still being paid more than women, and then also workforce participation. So learning a lot of that really early on probably triggered a lot of that sort of gender equality, and more than gender equality, I'd say it's like the gender opportunity. And while there is a lot to be said for the structure and the systems that are out there that open up those opportunities, as you mentioned, Charlie, it's also about that internal space. It's about how we build women's confidence to have that equal opportunity in their own mind of staying in the workforce if they want to, of regardless of where their life is going and what they're bringing into their life, but then also really stepping up into those leadership positions, board positions, C-suite positions, or whatever it is that they want to do. So that's kind of where I'm really passionate about with women. And I think that the way that our businesses are structured, and I follow an intuitive business coach called Jacqueline Atkins, and she's based in Australia, and she talks a lot about this. She talks about sort of like the traditional business paradigm being very masculine, being very, like if we talk about like yin and yang, being very yang. Whereas like a lot of what we're starting to see come forward and come through, because that served our societies and our businesses for decades, probably even for millennia, but we're needing to start to see a shift. We're starting to need to have alternative approaches. So it is this more kind of flexible and flowing way of working in your life, but then also within the workplace, the ways that we work, where it is much, much more about tapping into what's really valuable right now, what like is a different and alternative way of thinking about things, that kind of that freedom to pick and choose in the moment rather than be so focused on this sort of rigid plan, rigid control, like the power dynamics, and instead being really collaborative, being really creative, and having more of that lens on people and more of that lens on sort of the emotional side, the emotional journey that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's missing, I just think it's about amplifying it. And I think that women have a lot of those qualities, whether they're learnt, whether they're inbuilt, whether they're natural, whether they're learned socially. We're able to bring a lot of those qualities to the table and help get better outcomes. So that's kind of where I approach things. But I'd love to kind of hear your perspective as well of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm wondering is how much of that is truly accepted by men, and are men willing to make, I don't want to say compromises, but make changes that are helpful to women. Let's take one that you gave me 3 or 4 things that you have decided in your life. And just to give us a context, you never ask a woman how old she is, but can you give me an approximate so people they can put an identity, an age identity around this, because I think it's important. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 35. I'm more than happy to share my age. I'm actually very proud of it.
Well, you've accomplished a lot at 35 years old. I'm very impressed. That's really.
Thank you.
Now, one of the decisions you said you've made two decisions, and let's talk about these culture shifts and things that for the boomers are so difficult to understand. But people in your generation, it's not uncommon. You have made a decision. You have a partner that you've been with for over 5 years, right? A male partner.
Yeah. We're
And-
about to celebrate our 8th-year anniversary.
8th-year anniversary, but you have decided two really different sort of models to go by, and you have decided not to marry, and you've decided not to have children. And that is, talking to you, that those are decisions that are not made lightly, and that are made very purposefully, and that fit you. You use the word authenticity a lot, and we'll talk about that, and that how that is authentic to how you are created or designed or DNA or whatever gifts were given to you by the universe. That those are important to you. And then you also define later on about things in business and that flexibility and flow, and that, like your decision not to have children, has to do with flexibility, I think, if I understood you correctly. Can you talk to me about those decisions and how you came to make those?
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to. So one of the decisions that you mentioned is to not get married. And it's not even that I have anything against the institution of marriage. I think that it's a fantastic institution and it's great for the people who want to get married. I think for me and my partner, we just had an open and honest conversation about it. So he grew up with a lot more of we both grew up religious and going to church and going to services and things. And then for him, he wanted to get married within a church. And because I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, I didn't want to get married in a church. So then that kind of triggered a conversation, this really open and honest conversation that we had. We'd already been together a few years. Marriage was sort of the next milestone, the next thing to sort of happen. We kind of had this conversation. He has a business, I have a business. So I was never going to take his name. I actually have this belief that if you really truly want to start a new family, then it's about merging your last names together. If you are going to get married, and sort of that's actually the way forward, rather than somebody taking somebody else's name. You just combine the half of one name and half of another name.
That's very cool.
For my sister, it was Steinberger and Hamilton, and so combined it was Hamburger. But we were talking about it, and we were we're not going to change names. We already knew at that stage that we weren't going to have children. And so we were well, why are we doing this? Why are we getting married, specifically married? We were already in Australia, it's called de facto, so we were already considered, in inverted commas, kind of married. There was no real, he's a solicitor, so he knows the law and stuff like that. He was there's no real legal, benefits to it. So we were going, well, do we really need to get married? And then I was hang on a second. I want to party. I want to wear a beautiful dress. I want to be the center of attention. I want to have a party, celebrating us. And so we kind of decided, we were well, let's have a celebration. We were at the 5-year mark when we actually had a celebration. And we talked about, what were we going to call it? Because it wasn't a marriage and it wasn't even a commitment ceremony, because we also, because of my nature probably of change, and then I've sort of brought my partner on the journey as well, I really think about relationships as sort of being ever evolving. I know that I'm going to change, I know that he's going to change, and it's about reintroducing ourselves to each other along the way and working with each other as we grow and change through our relationship. So we were going to assess our relationship every 5 years to see, are we happy? What goals do we have? Is it still right to be together, etc. So a lot of people were if you're not getting married, it's going to be a commitment ceremony. And I was well, we're not actually committing either. For 5 years, maybe. So we had to come up with this name that was relevant. And so we thought, well, what's the value that we hold most in our lives? What's the experience that we want to have in our relationship in our life? And it ended up being happiness. The idea of just happiness being our highest value, happiness being the state that we want to live in and the experience that we want to have. And then really kind of acknowledging that we will shift and grow and change, and our relationship will shift and grow and change. We called it an Odyssey. So it was Happiness Odyssey. And it was a big celebration. It was vibrant. It was colourful. It was fun. It was, like all the things that, like it was still the traditional kind of structure of sort of like a wedding celebration, without any of the real kind of like marriage or religious elements or any of the real kind of like white lilies and like I love string quartets, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love them to death, but we didn't have that. We had like a lot of great music, like, and it was just really fun and vibrant, and we actually ended up having that celebration just before COVID, like a week or two before everything locked down, and we are so glad that we did that, and that we were able to see our family and our friends, before we obviously went into a lot of period of lockdown and isolation, and so like that's kind of where it is. But like for our parents, they couldn't get their head around it. For his parents and my parents, they still call it a wedding. They don't call it a marriage, but they still call it a wedding.
Well, that's good. Whatever name works for each person. How common are you finding this kind of thought with the millennials that you associate with? This is still rather uncommon, but I imagine you get a lot more support and respect from millennials than you do from older, more set in their ways people.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people now who are sort of making those same, like having those same questions and having those same conversations around, like, do we need that piece of paper? Do we need that legal or religious institution? And then on the not having children front, I simply don't like children. I've never liked children. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I liked being the baby. I liked being the center of attention. And I really don't like children. And everybody knows that about me. And people have tried to get me to like them. And look, I'll sort of like, if they're 5 and up and I can have a conversation, I'm okay-ish. But I really don't enjoy them. And so from a really early age, I was like, I don't want to have children. And I just found a partner who was on that same wavelength with me. And my family have finally gotten to the point where they're not trying to push me anymore, or not push me to have children, but push me to like children. And they just acknowledge it. And so I just kind of set my life up in ways that, minimizes that. But I've got a lot of friends and people who are my age and millennial. Like, we are really conscious of the global population. I think we've just passed 8 billion people in the globe. I'm adopted from India, so I was born into poverty, and one of the reasons that I was adopted was because my parents wanted to have more kids, and my dad was like, well, like there's already enough children in the world, why don't we adopt? So that's always been very kind of front and center for me, and then also just the personal preference around, and people are always like, oh, well, you'll like your own children. I'm like, it's not a risk I'm willing to take because of what you mentioned, Charlie. Yeah. Like, there's that flexibility and freedom, and even having a pet. I love like dogs and puppies and things, and I'm really averse to having a pet because I just want to be able to like spend my time overseas. I want to be able to like travel and live really flexibly and not have, I guess, some of those responsibilities. And a lot of people in my generation are starting to make that decision too. It's probably, I would say, maybe about 70-30. So like 70% are probably still getting married, having kids, but there's a good 30% who are either waiting or deciding not to.
And you're describing, I think, some important things in life as well, is that your willingness to travel, to experience things, to just take time off. Who says how can you take 2 months off and travel Europe? And yet you did. You took 2 months off your work and traveled Europe. And also, I was just thinking of something else that really applies. One of the things is that I think, unless you fall into the trap, the trap of once you set your ways, I'm not going to marry, I'm not going to have children, those are set. And I get a feeling in this generation, or at least where I am in this generation, nothing is set. I have a fun time talking in my blogs and in the show that never believe what I say today, because given more data, I could change my mind tomorrow. And the data doesn't have to be scientific data; it can be very experiential data. It can be this is a way, like for instance, I'm like you. I had no desire for children. My wife did, so I said, okay, that would be fine. Now, when my son came out, I've never loved anything like I've loved in my life. However, now people are talking grandchildren, and I'm saying grandchildren. I'm almost 74. I don't want to be changing diapers and dealing with all that shit. I just,
literally.
Now, and all the grandparents tell me, oh, you're going to love it, you're going to love it. But I'm not in there. You know what I want to do, Lata, is I want to we've kind of given an idea of the changes of generational changes and life changes and organizational. Let's take this sort of internal change methodology and let's sort of transfer it into business. And there are certain particular things that are involved with women, and some things that are open gender, that are not single gender. I want to talk. Let's kind of transition, take a break, and we'll transition into the workplace a bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go for it.
Let's take a brief break here. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to the next chapter with Charlie, and we have, a unique perspective from a delightful guest, Lata Hamilton, who is a millennial, creates her own businesses, and she's much like me. Her businesses last for 5 to 7 years, and then she's on to something else. Well, I'm a bit older. She said she's had 3, I've had 7. So we are talking about change. We just talked about change, personal change, and sort of high level corporate change. I want to find out, let's talk about the relationship between these corporate change initiatives and how essential it is to consider the impact and the feedback and the collaboration of individuals, which is often forgotten. We're just going to set up a new form of rules and regulations, of standard operating procedures, and everyone will buy in, but they won't. What do you see as some important factors in the necessity of employee adoption or belief in the changes that the corporation is making, how the individuals will impact that corporate change?
In terms of change, we often kind of see that change is often sort of top down. It's often leader led, and that is really important. So it is important for leadership to, say it is a new system or a new process or a new regulation or standard operating procedure. It is important for a leadership team of an organisation to have that vision, to hold that vision for where their organisation and their people are going to go and what the future looks like. So that is absolutely important. And so we have those cascades down into the organisation. In the past, over the last, say, 20, 30 years, it's traditionally been like that, right? So it's been great, we'll just lead by command and control. We'll use our authority to cascade change down into the organisation and almost force it down.
Very control-oriented.
Yes, absolutely. And, it kind of worked as well in terms of in the past where you had transformation and projects and change that was very planned, that was very methodical, it could get planned out and then delivered according to the plan. And so having change management methodologies and a bouncing ball process made sense, because it was great, if the project and the transformation is really well planned out, you can then have the change management sitting alongside it and you just tick the box as you go. But that's not the world that we live in now. It's not the pace of change that we have now. Now change is coming so thick and fast. By the time one change gets delivered, another change is usually hot on its heels, can actually unwind or break what was just put in.
Do you have an example of that would give? Because I think that's a perfect. I think you've really nailed something. Does an example come to your mind on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, if I had kind of have one example in one organization I was working with, they had a big program of work, and so when I started, I was starting on a project, and it was just a really small team. We were just 3 people, and we were going to be sort of delivering out this solution, this new technology, and by the time I finished, because so much had gotten added into that scope, and like the purpose of it had shifted and changed, that individual project became its own program of work and now suddenly had 100 people working on it. And so the original change, if we had delivered that, it would have been irrelevant because within a few months, it had already shifted and morphed and changed so much. And so like 2 years later, we were still working on that change. And I also see, in other changes that I've worked on where a piece of technology has been delivered and within 2 years, the change is having to be done again because either like the technology has changed or the solution has changed and it's not fit for purpose anymore. So within 2 years after all the effort and expense of development and building and launching a tool, it's like within 2 years you're having to redo that a second time again. Doesn't mean that you can't build on the lessons from the first time, but it's also like, was there really return on investment if you're having to literally start from scratch again? So that's happening a lot. And then obviously during COVID, there was a lot of changes that were already in flight and in flow. COVID came, other changes then had to be prioritized, and the way that we worked and what was what was delivered had to be prioritized. And so that shifted and changed. And now what we're seeing the pace of change so fast that new technologies, new ways of working, new market players, so more nimble market players, like finance is a great example of that, where you've got, like these really big established financial institutions, like banks, for example, and then you've got all of these really nimble small fintech companies. So to compete with something new that's just emerged into the market, those bigger established organizations or banks might need to then suddenly pivot what they're doing in order to be able to compete and not lose market share.
If I may, they have such huge infrastructure and back end that they may be able to change a philosophy or a corporate key success factor or a strategy, but without considering all of the layered back-end changes that have to happen, without really considering how employees have to change not only the way they work but the way they think about work and the way that it gets for your larger organizations it gets very complex.
Absolutely right. And it's those culture and those ways of working that's often missing from leader-led change or from top-down change. It's the fact that if you really want to get your people to be able to be empowered around change and to be able to be flexible and nimble for themselves and take whatever change is coming down the line, like at this point in time, all I'm hearing is people are exhausted. People are really fatigued by the volume of change and by the constant pivot. And so it's like, if you want people to have that sustained energy, that sustained positivity, motivation and optimism, you need to be able to almost I like to say, like, arm and armor themselves with the ability to not just accept change, but to also embrace it and potentially lead it for themselves. And so that's where I like to say, like, when you kind of start to bring in more grassroots activities where you're activating the grassroots of organizations, so all the teams at the lower levels, when you're starting to help them become more empowered and own the change themselves. So you've got the top-down leader-led, you've got the grassroots bottom-up, and the magic happens in the middle. And that's where you get like great engagement through the change. And you really start to, it's like the burden of change doesn't just sit on the shoulders of leaders. It's shared and distributed by everybody, and great ideas can kind of bubble up from the bottom of the organization. And then you've got kind of like that North Star and those really like kind of key inspiring leaders to kind of help bring those things to life. And that's where the magic happens, where you meet in the middle. The magic is where you meet in the middle. And so it's a real shift in probably that command and control culture. It's a real shift in the capability of individuals because we are so ingrained, I think, in the way that our industrial relations laws work and the way that jobs are set up with like job descriptions to be like, this is what I do, this is all that I do, this is what I'm going to tick off, you know, in my day-to-day and my week-to-week and my year-to-year. And it's like, actually, if you think more from a transferable skills lens, if you think more about the value that you bring rather than the time that you spend or the roles and responsibilities that you have, and you just go, how can I, and this is what I teach a lot of my students in change leadership, how can I use what's fit for purpose right now? How can I use what's going to practically add value right now, the tool or the template or the activity or the exercise? Because like, that's what organizations and leaders need. They need value. They need ideas. They need innovation and creativity. And there's a little bit of coaching up that can happen in terms of like maybe younger generations or lower levels of the organization are totally able to coach up into the more senior, seasoned leaders and showcase like the power of collaboration and creativity coming from the organization as a whole.
Well, Lata, your feedback and your insights are just so enchanting, and I think gives so much hope. I really like what you have to say. Now, one of the things that you have written, and that your commitment to women, and I want it to be clear that it's not that you're not committed to men. It's just that you see some holes in the leadership capacities, or not capacities, but opportunities for women. And one of the things that you wrote was your mission is to help women have the passion to create a new job or their current job in such a way that invites full authenticity. That, women, it's looked on by our patriarchal society that women having children are some sort of deterrent to leadership and sort of their capability of being committed to the company, and we both think that's not true. Tell me, what do you mean by authenticity, and how it has to do with women in particular?
Yeah, I think for a lot of women, there is that level of sort of fitting into the status quo and the very patriarchal society. And, obviously through like the 80s, 90s, there was definitely that image of like the power woman. And now we're sort of starting to see more about, especially with like the younger generations, like millennials starting to have children, around more of that flexibility and that flow between life and work, and wanting to have both and wanting to be able to work in a different way. And so some of the things that I kind of show and showcase is around deciding like who you are, what you want, what value you bring, and how much you're worth. Like
and what kind of, now that's perfect, but I have to ask you, what kind of process do you take your students through to apprehend or to comprehend those very, very primal and essential attitudes?
Yeah, it's almost like having to hardwire and like rewire, I should say, the way that we think by actually celebrating, because, for a lot of us, especially millennials, we were really ambitious in our early career, and we kind of got told to slow down, and we got told to, like do our time and to take a back seat and stuff like that. And I'm like, from an authenticity perspective, I'm like, you can go and do whatever you want to do. You can go and be the type of leader that you want to be. It might be about being creative about how you do it. So for me, I went and found the project space. I went and moved into change management and became a day rate contractor. And that was the way that I was able to both have success but do it on my terms, have success but do it in a way that was really authentic to me, using what I was great at. So I tend to kind of really take women through this 5-step career change formula, where you kind of calculate the costs of what it's actually costing you right now to be in the situation if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling underpaid or overlooked, if you're feeling frustrated or bored in what it is that you're doing. So like, what's the actual costs financially, personally, and spiritually to you?
5 steps is a lot, but can you give me at least 3 that we could give to our listeners right now? And if we have to go to all 5, if we go to all 5, I won't bother, but kind of briefly give us an idea of what women could do today to enhance their path of growth.
Yeah, so I think that the first one is really calculating those costs. so you can get that commitment around what you want that change to be. Then remembering your worth, so really celebrating and acknowledging all the things that you have, your skills and your experience, the value that you bring to the table, and then getting really clear on what you want in career. And I always like to kind of make sure that whatever the goal you're setting is actually holistic, that you start with how you want your life to be, and then you workshop back to what you want your career to be, and what elements you want in terms of like the days that you work, the time that you work, the salary or income that you're on, the types of people that you're with, the types of work that you work on. But starting with how you want to live your life, and then kind of retrofitting how you set your career up to do that. And those are the first 3 steps of the formula. And so like, if you just did those 3, you'd be so much like on your way to really being able to show up with confidence and authenticity in every aspect of your life, and really starting to build that self-confidence for yourself.
Where are our leaders going to be able to find those steps?
Yeah, so they can go and grab the free download. So it's a free underpaid and overlooked coaching action guide. And you can get that from my website, so latahamilton.com. And the direct link is latahamilton.com/worthit.
Okay, so I'm writing these down, latahamilton.com. And the second one is?
/worthit at the end, worth it.
Oh, /worthit?
Yep.
Okay, I will include those in the show notes. Lata, we could talk for a long time. There's so many things we agree on and so many stories I'd like to tell you that, I think I told you I was a child of the 60s, so I was all about change and about doing things different and our way and reassessing society. And I have had in my years a minimum of 7 careers. At 20, I hitchhiked around the country in 3 months. There's just so many, there's a couple of things that are similar to what you have done that I did 50 years ago, not 70, I'm not that old. But I so identify with what you're doing and I so agree with it. I think you're really on to something, and I want our listeners to learn more from you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. You've been incredible.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much for having me, Charlie.
Okay, and I will put in the show notes, and I have several links to different aspects of you that I will include in the show notes as well. So thanks again. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie, and as usual, until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.